TikTok is full of people sharing their experiences, advice, and hot takes around debt. So today I'm actually gonna react to some and see what's actually worth considering and what may be helpful to avoid. Okay, let's look at this first TikTok.
Number one debt removal hack that nobody is talking about is debt discharge. In 1933, President Roosevelt passed House Joint Resolution 192. This act removed all lawful money from the system. The Supreme Court said that that's unconstitutional because it left us no way to pay off our debts. So they had to leave us a remedy, and that remedy was debt discharge for those who demanded it. Of course, they didn't publicize this remedy to the public. Yes, House Joint Resolution
Is he talking about bankruptcy?
was repealed, however, it has to stay in effect until all lawful money is returned to the public. If you're still skeptical about debt discharge, look it up for yourself. I personally have discharged over $20,000 and my mortgage is next. If this interests you and you want to learn more, click the link in my bio.
Okay, so a couple of things. Sounds like he's referring to bankruptcy. So I was looking at his links to try to get a sense, because he's like, click the link in my bio to get a sense, and it just looks like you potentially are paying for just some sort of consultation. I'm not really seeing anything more than that. But to be honest, it sounds like bankruptcy. The only weirdness to that, or something I'm trying to understand, is he said his mortgage is next. Yeah, I mean, bankruptcy, there's chapter 7 and chapter 13, and without getting too into detail about it, chapter 7 is where you're gonna typically get your unsecured debt discharged, like credit cards, personal loan, medical bills, right? And you could technically include your mortgage, but most of the time, if you're discharging any kind of secured loan, you're losing the asset attached to it as well. It's pretty rare where in a chapter 7 you can discharge a car loan and then just keep the car, right? There's a collateral attached to it. So it sounds like he's talking about bankruptcy. He's being unclear about that, so I can't say for sure. It sounds like he's got a decent following, but it sounds like he's just talking about bankruptcy. And yeah, bankruptcy can be helpful for people, but I would want a little more understanding of what he's actually referring to. Okay, let's look actually at the next video.
This is my favorite way to get out of debt fast. This is the exact method that my husband and I used to pay off over $65,000 in debt in less than 2 years. And now we've been able to spend the last year making our money go to work for us and watching it grow and grow and grow. This method is called the debt avalanche. Now you may have...
Yes, debt avalanche. Solid option. We'll talk more about it in a sec.
You may have heard of the debt snowball, where you pay off your debts from smallest to largest, but there's a big flaw in that method that no one talks about. I absolutely hate paying interest, and this is where the avalanche has the snowball beat. What you're going to do is organize your debts from largest to smallest by interest rate, not by loan amount. Every month you're going to pay minimum payments on...
Yeah, so she's just going to explain how the avalanche works. So totally agreed. Avalanche method is amazing for people that can afford their minimum payments and more, right? So the whole idea is payoff planning. So something that has been incredibly popularized is called the debt snowball method, and it's been popularized by a gentleman named Dave Ramsey. That all in mind. The snowball method, and she'll probably explain this in a sec here, but is where you're basically lining up all the balances from the smallest balance to largest, and then you're basically using that smallest balance as your priority account. So let's say you're paying minimums on everything. Well, then that smallest balance is your priority account, and so you're gonna pay your extra that you can put towards it. So let's say you have $50 in monthly extra or disposable. Then that smallest balance, you're gonna pay minimum plus that monthly extra. To what her point is, and it's a really good point, is you're completely ignoring interest rates. And so the avalanche method is where you're lining up highest interest to lowest interest, right? You're ignoring balance. You're just looking at, okay, what has the highest interest rate? And then you're making that your priority. And then once you pay off that one, you're taking everything you were just paying towards that one and paying it to the next highest interest account. It can get you out of debt way faster. It can save you quite a bit of money. Again, it does depend on your actual debts and what the interest rates are and the balances, but for the most part, I typically find the avalanche method to be far cheaper, easier, and faster than the snowball method. But let's keep watching.
Everything except for the debt with the largest interest rate. That's the loan that's costing you the most in interest every month. We want to get her out of the way as fast as we can, because the longer she sticks around, the more money you're spending on interest. Throw every dollar you can squeeze out of your budget at that very first high interest debt. And once that first debt is paid off, take everything you were paying for that first debt and apply it to the second debt.
Yeah, exactly. The only thing I want to catch here is she mentioned, and I'll just go back a little bit. Okay, here we go. This is the part.
Every month you're going to pay minimum payments on everything except for the debt with the largest interest rate. That's the loan that's costing you the most in interest every month.
Not necessarily, right? So this is where it comes down to everyone's situation. She basically said, hey, pay the highest interest one first because that's the one that's costing you the most money. Not necessarily, right? It does depend on the balance, right? So for instance, if it's a $100 balance, but has a really high interest rate, that doesn't mean that's costing you the most money, right? There could be higher balances with a little bit smaller of an interest rate that's actually costing them way more. So that's not fully true. It depends on everyone's situation. So that's why I do feel like using a little bit of both, like Snowball and Avalanche, can be the way to go. A little bit of Monica in my life. There is a product out there called Savvy. It basically takes the best of both worlds. It's its own algorithm. So sometimes it'll have you pay off the smallest balance and then prioritize highest interest. It kind of uses the best of both worlds based on actual situations. So that's where I think it's a little helpful to potentially do a little bit of both. But if you're very much like, I just want to focus on one thing, then interest rates, then great, do Avalanche. If you're one, I'm very motivational based and you're like, I just want to see progress being made on these accounts, then the Snowball method can be great. But just because it's a highest interest account does not mean it's costing you the most money. That's the only thing I want to clarify. It really does depend. Okay, let's look at the next video here.
Here's a credit collection tip that you should always remember, and this will show them that you know exactly what you're talking about. I want you to call the collection agency that is chasing you and ask them for the following. If they cannot provide these, they cannot validate the debt. Number 1, the original account number. Number 2, the original name of the creditor. Number 3, the date the account was opened. Number 4, the date of the last payment on that account. Number 5, the amount of the original debt. Number 6, an itemized statement of the full history of that account. If they can't validate that, then they should cease communicating with you. If you need help with your credit, let me know. Follow for more.
Okay. Cool information, sharing basically how to validate debt, right? It's been around for years. You're just basically just asking, you could do it with a creditor, collection agency, it doesn't matter, right? You're just asking them to validate that you do indeed owe the debt. It's helpful when people that hear from someone or a creditor of some kind and they're like, I've never heard of you, I didn't owe you money. You can just validate that. Make sure they provide certain information to prove that you do indeed owe that debt. The only thing I want to call out on this is it's basically just talking about how to invalidate your debt. And it almost can sometimes come off as like how to basically wipe it out and not have to owe it anymore. That's not necessarily how this works.
Wazowski, you didn't file your paperwork last night.
Oh, that darn paperwork. Wouldn't it be easier if it all just blew away?
So even if you ask the collection agency or creditor to validate it, let's say they don't respond or they can't answer certain questions. I'd be confused why they can't answer certain questions. But anyways, if they don't respond, then sometimes people will be like, great, I invalidated the debt, I don't owe it anymore. You still owe the debt, right? The debt is still there.
I'm watching you, Wazowski. Always watching.
What can happen sometimes without going too in the weeds of it all is you may not see it reporting on your credit anymore. So sometimes if you have a debt to be validated, doesn't get a response, it can stop reporting. But eventually if they do validate it, then it may come back on your credit report again. So my point is this can be helpful for people that are potentially hearing from collections or creditors that they've never heard of and that they are almost confident they don't owe. And that'd be a great way to basically get them to stop calling you. But if you do owe the debt, validating debt that you do owe doesn't necessarily mean it can just go away if they don't respond to you, right? It may look like that because it's not on the report anymore, potentially. But again, validating debt that is valid, what does that do for you, right? It gets them to maybe to stop contacting you, but you can do that in different ways, right? You can just tell them to cease and desist contacting you. Right? There's literally an 11-word phrase. I put a video about this that you can read to a specific collection agency to literally get them to stop contacting you. So my point is doing this whole game of I'm going to validate debt that I owe. What is that going to do? Right? If you just want them to stop contacting you, just tell them to cease and desist. You don't necessarily need to go through this roundabout way that doesn't actually mean anything, right? You're validating debt that you owe. If you don't owe the debt and you're confident you don't owe it, validating can be great. That makes sure that there are these processes in place so people can't just tell you to pay them and you don't actually owe them things. But anyways, let's move on to the next thing here.
Debt consolidation companies absolutely do not work. I always tell people if you are on the verge of dealing with a debt consolidation company, feel free to reach out to me first. But if you are that far in the hole, I would suggest speaking to a bankruptcy attorney. And like you said,
Amen. Amen. Bankruptcy is incredibly helpful, and oftentimes Chapter 7 specifically can be far cheaper, easier, and faster than any kind of debt consolidation program. That said, they are not scams. Okay, I understand there's a lot of motion behind this, but they are not scams within themselves, right? This process of what debt consolidation programs do is negotiating down past due debt. That's been around for years, right? It's just the process of handling debt that has gone into collections or it's charged off, and you're now just negotiating for less than what's owed. That is not a scam. That is just a process that is in place. That said, there's a lot of marketing tactics around these kind of programs that can make people feel like it's a scam, right? They're getting pitched one thing and then they get pushed into this, or they're not fully explained what debt consolidation programs are. They sign up anyways and then they get sued and they're like, oh, this is a scam. I didn't know this was gonna happen. Well, they didn't explain that to you. It's not a scam. It's a very legitimate option. However, bankruptcy, specifically Chapter 7, can often be cheaper, easier, and faster than one of these programs if you qualify for it and your assets are protected when you do it. But if you don't qualify for a 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy, which I dive in more in another video, but Chapter 13 bankruptcy is where you're going to be in a repayment plan over 3 or 5 years. So if you don't qualify for Chapter 7, but you still feel like you need to do something, like you're falling behind, debt consolidation programs could be helpful to compare Chapter 13 bankruptcy to. But this guy's absolutely right. He's referring to Chapter 7, I'm assuming, can be the way to go over debt consolidation programs, but it really does depend on your situation. But I'll keep going.
Because what's happening is people get the false sense of security as you're paying them, let's just say $300 a month, and you think that your debts are being paid, and they're not. They're taking a portion of that money and keeping it for themselves. Let's start there. And number 2, they're not even fulfilling a minimum payment obligation to your creditors. Therefore, those creditors are going to report late each month on your credit report, which puts you at the risk of that creditor then becoming a collection, that collection then suing you, them entering a default judgment. All in the meantime, you think you're doing the right thing by paying. So I always say, please stay away from that. If you guys have questions for me, call me.
He's referring to one large company. Honestly, I'm going to censor it out just for the sake of security of that company. It's not a scam. That said, logic is all there, right? The only thing is his logic is based on the company not explaining all of this to the client, right? So he's sharing like, here's actually what happens. But in a perfect world, when they speak with the company should be explaining all these things and being transparent about here's how the program works. The challenge is that's not happening. And so people sign up thinking it's one thing, and then it ends up being this, what it literally is, and then they end up being like, this is a scam. So all that said, can be a very good option. It just really depends on your situation, whether you're falling behind and the alternatives don't make sense. Let's look at the next one.
If you want to pay off your debts quickly, this is the fastest way to do so. And it's just 4 steps. List your debts from smallest through to largest. Ignore what the interest rates are.
Sounds like Snowball method, but let's keep watching.
Step 2, make your smallest debt your first victim. So make the minimum repayments on all your other debts, but with that smallest debt that you have, put any extra money that you have.
Okay, I don't mean to cut him off. It's just a Snowball method, right? We talked about this earlier. It's literally just the Snowball method. I honestly find the Avalanche method to typically be cheaper, easier, and faster, like we've mentioned, because you're focusing on the highest interest account first. But I can also make a case for using a little bit of both. A little bit of Monica in my life. And trying to maybe take out some smaller balances first and then work on some higher interest ones. But he's just going to be talking about the Snowball method, so let's move on to the next thing.
Consolidating my debt was one of the worst mistakes that I made in my money journey, and I want to talk about that because I think a lot of people fall into the same trap, and it can set you back years. So here's what happened to me, and it sucked, and I doubled my debt and added years onto my situation. So I had $5,000 in credit card debt. I got an email about a personal loan, and I thought, what a great idea. I can use this loan to consolidate everything, so I'll only have one payment. I'll get rid of all these credit card payments. It's going to be great. Actually, no, it wasn't great, because I maxed out all my cards again because I did not address the root cause of why I was even in debt in the first place. And then I found myself in over $10,000 of now high interest debt. Because I had no idea what I was doing and I had never gotten any good advice about this and I didn't even know where to go to get advice about this, I took that loan and it was a really big interest rate. I didn't even know about interest rates at the time, so I didn't know that this was bad. Can you get consolidation loans that are...
Okay. Super unfortunate. I see this all the time. I'll be honest. I see people just like this, right? They have credit card debt. They're making all these different payments, right? It's $5,000 in her situation, but I see it in a much larger scale, right? I'm talking about 30, 40, 50, 60 plus thousand, right? And they're like, all I need is just a consolidation loan so I can get this all in one payment. I get it. There's a lot of appeal. You may see your credit score go up because you're now paying off a revolving credit and you now have an installment loan. You only have one payment to deal with, and hopefully it's a lower interest rate than the average rate of your credit cards. But you know yourself best. So I would take this video based on what you know about yourself, okay? So what I mean by that is, if you're someone that's really strict with yourself and you got into credit card debt because of whatever hardship you were facing, could have been from medical bills, could have been from some emergency, right? It's not necessarily just overspending, then you may not necessarily do this, right? You may be able to consolidate with a consolidation loan and then just pay off the loan. But if you know yourself and you know that, you know what, if I have these credit cards opened again with an empty limit and full amount to use, I may end up using them and then not paying the full statement balance off. If that's you, then this is great insight. I've seen this happen all the time, and then people end up in more debt. So you know yourself best. So I'm not gonna watch the rest of the video just because I kind of get a sense of where this is going, but I hope you know that it can be helpful to do so, but you just need to know your limits and how you handle that. So anyways, let's move on to the next video.
I'm in the process of paying off $30,000 worth of credit card debt, and I'm trying to decide if I should take my emergency fund and use it to pay off the remaining credit card debt that I have. And I'm just going back and forth on what makes the most sense. And you guys have actually been really helpful with all of your advice. There's some of it that I will not be taking. I will not be listening to Dave Ramsey, and I'm not selling my RV. But the rest of it, I really liked. First thing was that I should try to reduce my monthly expenses wherever I can. Love this. And I think it's always wise for us to be like adjusting our budgets and auditing as we see fit.
Just to cut her off real quick, sounds like she doesn't like Dave Ramsey. That's totally fine. Paying off your debt with an emergency fund is interesting. I would say it really depends on your situation and your economics, right? So think of your cash flow as like you're a business, right? So where will things be in a few months based on your reoccurring revenue or income, right? If you feel like you could refill the hole that you use fairly quickly, like within the next month or so, it could make sense to use a portion of that to pay off the debt and then refill the emergency fund and continue on with your life. Because at that point, you're able to lower your debt load, so you're not paying as much towards your debts anymore. So your monthly debt obligations are hopefully going down. You may see your credit score go up because your debt to income's going down, utilization's opening up a bit. But if you don't really see the near future of being able to refill the emergency fund, I can see it sometimes as reckless because you never know what could happen. And it also depends on what your emergency fund is built out of, right? So what I mean by that is if you have like $1,000 in an emergency fund, but your monthly expenses are like $5,000, probably wouldn't touch the emergency fund, right?
No touchy. No touchy. No touch.
It's not gonna be enough to cover an emergency, but that also would mean you probably need to save up a little bit more first. Whereas if, let's say you have 6 months worth of expenses in your emergency fund, well, utilizing 3 months of it, let's say, basically gives you 3 months to refill that amount, if that makes sense. So I could make a case of why it may be okay to utilize 3 months of it towards a debt and then utilizing the next 3 months to try to rebuild that emergency fund. It should be overall cheaper for you because you're helping save a lot of money in interest. Again, you're gonna wanna get that money back in the emergency fund, but I could make a case for that with this situation, but we'll keep watching.
And I did find a couple areas where I could reduce. I think I could reduce our groceries pretty successfully. The exact amount that I could save us every month is like yet to be determined. But I think I could reduce our groceries, and then I could reduce our internet from 138 to 75. And then same with cell phones. We currently have...
Yeah, this is great. Not everyone can do this. If you can, I encourage you to do so. Understanding your cash flow is huge, and I was just kind of giving an example of like, think of yourself as a business. If you're running a business, let's say you're an owner, you wanna know where every dollar's going. So you should be treating the same thing with your own personal finances. Anyways, absolutely reducing your expenses can be incredibly helpful, but also it's sometimes easier said than done, right? Sometimes people have already done that. So we'll keep going. I'll skip ahead a little bit.
To be exact, and the amount that I owe on credit cards is $12,472. Over the winter, I was actually really successful at putting about $4,000 towards our debt every single month, but times have changed and I'm not really able to get all the way up to $4,000 towards the debt, but I am putting like almost every extra penny that we have towards our debt, and it's anywhere between $2,000 and $3,000 every month. So on the low end of that at $2,000, it would still take us 6 months to pay off our debt. And if it does take us 6 months to pay off the credit card debt, we would accrue $1,400 in interest. If I use the...
So that's my point. You're talking about, should I use the funds to do that and save money and interest? I think there could be cases to do so. It just depends on how much you have built up in your emergency fund. So I don't want to repeat myself, but basically I was saying, if you have 6 months worth of expenses, right? So say you spend $3,000 a month for your normal expenses, your operating costs to live. And so this means you have 18 grand because that's 6 months of expenses. Using 3 months of that, so $9,000 to pay off some of the debt, I could make a case for. But it just really is important that you're refilling the emergency fund, right? Because it's supposed to be an emergency fund. It's something you don't touch unless it's emergency, but paying off credit card debt, depends how you look at it, could be something you consider as an emergency, just in the perspective of like, I want to figure out the most cost way out from here, and I don't want to be paying all this money towards interest. And so if you can save money in interest, you'll save money in the long run. It just depends. Well, everybody, thank you so much for watching. That was just me kind of reviewing some of these TikToks. If you have any questions at all, leave a comment down below. If you have questions that you want me to try to answer in a video, please send those as well. Thanks so much.